All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Taylor Hanrath. I'm Manager of Capital Works here at the County of Renfrew. Thank you for joining us for our Public Information Center number 2 for the development of the county's Transportation Master Plan. This is the county's first endeavor on developing a Transportation Master Plan. To date, we do still have our Asset Management Plan. However, we embarked on this endeavor in order to identify projects that weren't encompassed in our asset management plan, such as projects that required expansion of county assets or certain policies related to expansion of assets, traffic control, and crossings and the like. With that said, I will introduce our consultant team who have been leading us on the development of our Transportation Master Plan. Aegis, if you'd like to take it away and do your introductions, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Francois, you're on mute.
Sorry, didn't realize that. I haven't used Teams enough so far. So yes, hi everyone. Happy to be here today to present you this Transportation Master Plan. My name is Francois Tomeo. I'm accompanied by Anya, who did a lot of work on the plan, and as well Narayan from the firm Mavicon, who's one of our sub-consultants that took care of subjects relating to transit and active transportation. So today we're the second Public Information Center. So just things to note before we move into the plan itself. The cameras, our microphones are currently turned off. So this presentation is recorded. So there will be a question period that will follow the presentation. You can, if you have any questions that you want to address right away, please feel free to write them through the chat. And during the question period, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand under reactions in Teams, and you can unmute, and then when you're called on. All right. So really, that consultation today is very important for us and for the county. So we really want to hear from you what you think about the outcome of this plan. And if needed, we can make adjustment. But at the end, this plan is made for you. So I want to make sure that you're comfortable and that it aligns with your expectations. So really, this Public Information Center, is meant to present the TMP update and provide you the chance to have your say and speak with us, the project team, and learn about transportation in the county of Renfrew. So we really want to hear your ideas, and if you have any concerns, please don't hesitate. So yeah, some overview. Maybe probably most of you will not learn anything there, but it's important to remind you. County of Renfrew is part of a two-tier government system. County contains 12 townships and 5 towns and is located within Eastern Ontario along the Ottawa River. The County of Renfrew is the largest county in Ontario. As per 2021 statistics data, the land area of the county is approximately 8,000 square kilometers and has a population density of 14.5 people per square kilometer. The country has a population of just above 106,000 people as per the 2021 census, which was about a 4% increase compared to 2016. For the county, the population is expected to grow by about 1,000 people by 2036, that's based on what is indicated in the county's official plan. So what is the TMP, Transportation Master Plan? It's a long-term strategy for managing multimodal transportation systems that align with the county's growth and vision. So to make sure that we can accommodate future growth and have sustainable solutions for the future. So it's very important to note that the master plan update follows the Class EA class environmental assessment for municipal road projects process. And we cover phase 1 and 2 of that process, including public information centers and evaluation of alternatives. The comprehensive plan is meant to facilitate streamlining and implementation of recommended capital works. So basically, study process, this is a summary. I won't go into detail of every task, but there's 3 big steps. Existing conditions assessment, which we've already covered in the first PIC. Now we're really in the identification of alternative and solutions. As part of that, there was transportation modeling and forecast, network assessment to determine capacity, what's required in terms of transit service, looking at parking, developing policies and design standard updates, looking at active transportation, and then developing solutions and alternatives, and of course public and stakeholder engagement. At the end, the next steps will be to document and finalize the plan and to make it public. So really 2 horizons that we're looking mostly, short term 2029 and medium term 2034. For the next step, I'll let Anya present you the rest of the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Francois. So the first Public Information Center was held back in March of 2024, and much of what we heard at that meeting indicated a desire for looking into opportunities for transit, enhancing the active transportation network for better access and connections to services, and addressing safety concerns in the county through traffic calming initiatives, roundabouts, and signals. This feedback we used in part to help shape the recommendations that we're sharing today with everyone, and we hope that these are reflected in the county's future transportation network. So the objective of this Public Information Center is similar to the first, but this one will have a focus towards the actual recommendations and findings of the Transportation Master Plan. We've already provided a brief recap of the study process, and we'll present the preliminary recommendations we've developed. And as mentioned previously, look for feedback from everyone. I should also note that while I mentioned the Transportation Master Plan itself is relatively high level, we invite any comments at all with respect to any problem areas you are aware of, like intersections with heavy congestion or safety issues, any unsafe crossings, speeding areas, or whatever the case may be. These type of problems, while may not be specifically addressed within the study, can indicate broader problems that could be addressed through this TMP study. So through our review of the future conditions within the county, we've highlighted some of the key challenges and opportunities. In terms of the challenges, the county has maintained a growing population over the last census period, and ensuring that the transportation networks keeps pace with this growth is critical for the success of the county. The county is also currently highly dependable on driving, with over 90% of trips being completed with cars. There's significant opportunity for accommodating other modes of transportation. This is especially true when we consider the fact that Renfrew County, like many other municipalities across Ontario, does have an aging population. So it is important to provide safe and efficient alternative modes of transportation for this population, as it is critical to the county. While on the most part, the county's transportation network is relatively safe, there are a few areas we identified with room for improvement. Pedestrian crossings and appropriate active transportation facilities, respective of the roadside environment, poor intersection sightlines, and poor roadway conditions being some of the key areas for improvement that were identified as part of this study. Another thing was poor road conditions and lack of roadway maintenance, which was also noted as a major concern within the county, especially during the winter months. So now looking into the opportunities, there are some key areas the county can leverage, particularly in terms of road safety and provision of appropriate infrastructure. The county can make strategic investments in road safety initiatives, including public education, technologies and infrastructure improvements, and law and enforcement can also help make streets safer for all people, particularly the vulnerable road users like pedestrians and cyclists. Furthermore, the county also has the potential to fund and deliver facilities in partnership with local municipalities and can coordinate the implementation of facilities across jurisdictional boundaries. There is also an opportunity to update the county's road design practices to guide discussions around the priorities of different areas and land uses, as well as update the decision-making practices to consider the operation and maintenance costs associated with project decisions instead of just considering the upfront capital costs of the service or infrastructure. So part of the master planning process is identifying various alternatives. These set the general theme of the study going forward and direct the overall recommendations for policy and infrastructure investment. So as part of this study, we developed a total of 4 alternatives. Alternative 1 includes doing nothing. The county would not invest in any new infrastructure improvements and just focus on maintaining its existing network. Moving on to alternative 2, which is the status quo. This generally reflects the existing conditions. The county would continue its current development and generally improvements would be in direct response to that development. Alternative 3, on the other hand, the road network strategy would put emphasis on improvements to the county's road network, predominantly focusing on improving traffic operations and accommodating motor vehicles. Lastly, alternative 4, which is strategic investments, would put emphasis on strategic road network capacity improvements while also promoting and enhancing the active transportation network and explore the possibility of developing a public transit system. This is our preferred alternative, which is strategic investments. So in order to assess the list of alternatives that I just talked about and select the preferred one, we basically developed a number of strategic priorities, which are based on various planning and policy documents published by the county and province. These priorities include things like mobility options, so meeting different mobility needs. Does the network foster a good sense of community? Is the network safe for all users, regardless of age, ability, or mode choice? And does the network help mitigate the negative impacts to the natural environment? And lastly, is the network prepared to adapt to changes in transportation technologies? So These are all the considerations for determining a preferred solutions. And based on the strategic priorities, as I mentioned earlier, we assessed the 4 alternatives and how they served to align the county's transportation network with its priorities. And overall, after we assessed them, alternative 4, which is strategic investments, was selected as our preferred solution. So moving on to looking at the forecasted traffic volumes, we use the existing average annual daily traffic or AADT volumes and projected them out to the 2034 horizon year by applying a 1% growth rate. These volumes are critical in decision making, especially when we consider things like cycling facilities, network improvements, traffic calming. Really, for any decisions relating to the road network, the AADT is one of the first considerations. As mentioned here on the slide, most intersections will continue to operate at an acceptable level of service through 2034, except for Petawawa Boulevard at Portage Road, Daniel Street and Baskin Drive, and Petawawa Boulevard and Murphy Road, and lastly, Boundary Road East and Brougham Avenue. So some of our recommendations basically looked into kind of making the level of service for these intersections better and basically be taking a more proactive approach to ensure that they operate at acceptable levels of service in the future, which will be discussed later in the presentation. So in terms of road classifications, all county roads place a high degree of priority on traffic movement. Therefore, an arterial road classification is appropriate regardless of the roadway's AADT. Since the county has urban and rural roadways, the characteristics for an arterial roadway for urban and rural land use differ. Therefore, it is our recommendation that arterials are divided into minor and major subcategories, which reflect the degree at which the arterial roadway is required to serve more local functions within an urban environment. While some county roads are classified as semi-urban, for the purposes of design, all semi-urban should be considered urban in terms of their functional design characteristics. So looking into some future network improvements, based on our analysis and feedback from the county and the public, we have recommended some operational improvements to the road network, focusing on enhancing the safety, efficiency, and connectivity for all users. The recommended upgrades below aim to address current challenges such as traffic congestion, poor road conditions, and limited accessibility while preparing for future demands. First is Madawaska Boulevard, which is identified as the major node with large concentration of trip generators. So active transportation facilities are recommended on Madawaska Boulevard. It was noted that there were some space constraints in some areas due to a small right-of-way on Madawaska Boulevard, and the road in its current form has a significant local access function despite it being classified as an arterial road, which results in a significant number of conflicts between all road users. Furthermore, high density of accesses in combination with high traffic volumes and wide travel lanes with no provision for left turn vehicles results in a higher expected collision frequency. So to mitigate these conflicts and ensure safety for all road users, it is recommended that Madawaska Boulevard be converted from a 4-lane to a 2-lane cross section with 2-way left turn lanes and cycling facilities provided to ensure safety. In the interim, it is recommended to change the pavement markings at Madawaska Boulevard and Daniel Street. And in the long term, it is recommended to consider a roundabout be implemented at the intersection of Madawaska and Daniel Street. Moving on to Daniel Street, it was noted that Daniel Street has a significant number of accesses on it, and it has extremely short intersection spacing, which is generally not recommended. It was noted some developments do have multiple access locations or secondary accesses in a minor street, which allow for the removal of some Daniel Street accesses. To address the challenges posed by high access density and extremely short intersection spacing along this segment, the proposed interim solution includes the installation of a continuous median along Daniel Street, and this measure will enhance traffic safety by reducing conflict points, limiting left turn movements, and improving the traffic flow. For a long-term solution, the implementation of roundabouts at key intersections is recommended to further improve safety and operational efficiency. Moving on to Division Street, Baskin Drive West, and Duncan Drive intersection. So to address the challenges posed by high growth and increased traffic volumes along the Baskin Drive corridor, it was recommended to realign Baskin Drive West to meet the Duncan Drive to form a four-leg intersection. And it is recommended to consider operation of the intersection as a roundabout. This realignment and the potential roundabout design will enhance side distances, streamline traffic flow, and provide superior traffic control compared to the existing configuration. Lastly, Boundary Road at Brougham Avenue. At this intersection, operational concerns are anticipated as traffic volumes continue to grow, with the projections indicating that the intersection will operate at a level of service F in the future horizon. So although signalization is warranted to address those delays, a traffic circle with a 20-meter radius is recommended as a proactive solution to accommodate growth. So now to talk about the active transportation and transit part of the transportation master plan, I'm going to pass it over to Narayan.
Yeah, thanks, Hania. So when we looked at the active transportation for Renfrew County, we noted a couple of challenges and opportunities. So of course, the biggest challenge is that Renfrew County is enormous and has not an enormous population. So there's quite a large distance between a lot of the communities, which makes them, in most cases, impractical to connect between using certainly walking and also to a lesser extent cycling and e-bikes. And the other consequence of the smaller population is that there's simply not very much funding to go around. So we have to be very careful and prioritizing the most effective investments in active transportation that will have the best benefit, so we can efficiently use those funds. Another consideration is the conflict with recreational vehicles such as ATVs and snowmobiles. So the core of the active transportation network, so the cycling, pedestrian, and so on, in Renfrew County is the Renfrew County Trail Network. And in particular, the Algonquin Trail, which runs along the Ottawa River through towns such as Arnprior, Renfrew, Cobden, and Petawawa, which are also used by ATVs and snowmobiles. And those types of users have conflicting desires when it comes to the trail surface. So ATV users tend to prefer more gravel type surfaces versus cyclists, and certainly e-scooters, e-bikes would prefer more paved type surfaces. So there's a trade-off there in terms of what's ideal for one user is not necessarily ideal for another. And of course, we are in Eastern Ontario, so as we've experienced recently, there is a lot of snow in winter, and it can get quite cold. So then there's, again, the similar question about what to use the trails for in winter. And again, there's the conflicting needs between skiing and snowmobiling, which need the trails to be covered in snow, and cycling and walking, which we prefer to not be covered in snow and have the trails cleared. But there are some opportunities at the same time in the county, despite the very spread out nature, because people are not evenly spread out across the county. There are a number of towns, and most of the people live in a town, and those towns tend to be quite compact. So they're pretty much all small enough that you can walk across town, and the distances within the town are quite short. Another consideration that's changed in the past few years is the rise of electric micromobility. So that's stuff such as e-bikes and e-scooters. So for example, two towns that are 10 kilometers apart might historically have been, that's a moderate kind of bike ride. It could be some effort for especially people who are not cycling regularly. But that's a fairly comfortable distance to travel on an e-bike, and it also takes less time. So trips that may have not been really practical before by bicycle might become practical in the future if people start using more e-bikes, for example. So the bottom line is what we found is that transportation within towns can actually be quite competitive using modes such as walking, cycling, and e-bikes. But for the most part, traveling between towns, the distances are generally long enough that it's not going to be very competitive with other options, namely driving, and also potentially public transit if that is implemented. Next. Yeah. So the network that is proposed as part of the Transportation Master Plan is a fairly modest improvement upon the existing network. It's mostly upgrades of existing facilities rather than brand new proposed facilities, by which we mean it's mostly upgrading roadways, for example, to improve the active transportation along those roadways as opposed to creating new trails through new corridors. The key backbone of the network, as I mentioned earlier, remains the Algonquin Trail. And where we're focusing investments are those areas where there's the most opportunity for a significant number of trips to be actually taken using active transportation modes. So in particular, this tends to be areas where trails or county roads are passing through towns, because we know within the towns it's quite practical to walk and bike around in terms of the distances. As well as between towns that are quite close together. So we're looking at generally less than 10 kilometers apart. That's sort of the upper limit of where even with an e-bike, it starts to become less competitive to use the trail to travel for transportation purposes. Next. So when we are upgrading the trails or looking at upgrading the trails in these key areas where there's the most potential for transportation use of them, the types of improvements we're looking at are the surface, so potentially going from to better types of smoother surfaces. That may just simply be finer types of gravel. It's a lot of them are already stone dust, which is quite fine, but seeing where there are opportunities to improve the smoothness of the surface so that it's more efficient to cycle along, or within the towns, potentially even paving them with asphalt, which again reduces the rolling resistance when you're traveling along with a wheeled vehicle, such as a wheelchair or a bicycle. So it makes stuff feel effectively closer because it takes less energy to get there, which makes it more practical. The other part we're looking at is the the way they cross roadways. So a lot of the most of the major trails in the county are former railways. So the Algonquin Trail is the former Canadian Pacific Railway, for example, and they often just cross roadways at oblique angles and often without any official crossing facilities. So there's not necessarily signage or any kind of infrastructure to help people cross the road. So that's the kind of upgrade that we'd be looking at in these key areas, there's this photo on here on the screen, so some idea of what changes could be possible to make it a lot more comfortable and a lot safer for people who are traveling along the trail to cross the road. So in the most part, we're still looking at having the trail users yield to traffic. So we're not, in most cases, the level of use of the trail doesn't warrant a pedestrian crossover, so like a zebra crossing or a pedestrian priority crossing. But there are things that can be changed about the geometry to improve sight lines and reduce crossing distances, for example, to make it a lot more comfortable, convenient, and safe to cross the road. And without further ado, the main areas that we identified where there is the biggest potential to leverage the existing county trails for transportation, to upgrade them basically, are from Arnprior to Braeside, which goes right through the center of the town of Arnprior, from Renfrew to Cotyville, which is about 4 kilometers, just a little segment within the center of Cobden, from Cottenham Island to the border of Pembroke, and then again from Pembroke to Petawawa, where there's relatively continuous development through that segment. So there's not really much of a gap in terms of development between Pembroke and Petawawa. Pembroke itself is not actually part of Renfrew County, so that would be the town of Pembroke's responsibility well, there is the trail that does connect between those 2 points, but that's not within the scope of this particular study. So another consideration we did is just take a look as well at the municipal roads. So sometimes maybe the best route for active transportation isn't actually a county road. So we did try to keep in mind so that we're looking also at the adjacent town roads to identify potential opportunities to work with the townships in cases where maybe it makes more sense for active transportation to be using a town road rather than a county road. This is just an example in the town of Arnprior, which shows filtered permeability. So that means this is basically where you're using a local street as the active transportation route. In this case, the filtered permeability means that there's one little spot where bikes and pedestrians can get through, but cars can't. So in this case, there are a pair of cul-de-sacs on the left side of the screen, which are connected by a little pathway. So that means that these two streets, which are disconnected for cars, actually form a continuous route for active transportation, people walking and cycling. So that's one opportunity where you can create new routes through existing local streets at a pretty minimal cost and creating a pretty comfortable environment for people walking and cycling. We also started looking at the potential to introduce intercommunity transit through the county. So again, the challenge is the low population density. So the county is quite spread out, and that does tend to make it quite challenging to serve the entire population using a transit service. However, although this county is spread out, most of the communities are actually, most of the population is actually located in communities in pretty much a single line along the Ottawa River. So most of the major towns in the county, such as Arnprior, Renfrew, Cobden, Pembroke, and Petawawa, are all in a single line. So although the total distance is quite long, when it comes to serving with transit, it's actually relatively easy, because if you run a single bus route through the major population centers, we're able to actually have quite a good coverage of Renfrew County residents. So we looked at a few different options of how broad a bus system could be versus how much coverage it would have, and sort of the best cost benefit ends up being if having a bus route that runs from Ottawa through to Petawawa via Arnprior, Renfrew, Cobden, Pembroke, and Petawawa, which would provide which would connect 42% of the county's residents as well as Pembroke's residents. We did include Pembroke in this simply just because of its geographic location. It's kind of you can't really ignore Pembroke. There's a lot of travel to and from it. We did suggest that the route should connect to Ottawa, because that does introduce a lot of opportunities for Renfrew County residents, especially if they have limited access to a car or no access to a car potentially. So that it really opens up the quality of life for those people to be able to get to Ottawa for appointments, for entertainment, for work. It would be really quite a substantial improvement for equity to really create a lot of opportunities to travel around the county and get to all of the amenities that are in Ottawa. We were looking at still a relatively low frequency, just mostly for budget reasons. And again, the population of the county is not huge, so it would be difficult to support a super frequent bus service, but potentially, depending on the budget that's available, looking at about 4 to 16, probably closer to the lower end of that number, round trips per day between Petawawa and Ottawa. And again, when it comes down to funding, that really depends on provincial funding, because the county doesn't really have the funds on its own to support transit transit operations, which can be quite expensive, especially since for this type of transit operation, you would not really expect to recover that much of the costs by selling tickets for the bus. Most of it would still be expected to be a subsidy from the operator, which in this case would be the county. But the province does offer a number of subsidies for rural transit systems. And since 2020, many counties across the province have introduced transit systems using the provincial funds that have become available. So this making a grant application to the province would really be critical to set up such a transit system. It's worth noting there's also a fairly similar example of a transit system directly on the other side of the Ottawa River. On the Quebec side, their system is called Transcolline, and it's fairly similar. They have the long distance bus route that takes people into Gatineau at sort of similar kind of frequencies we're looking at here.
Okay, thanks, Narang. I can take over from here. So with respect to speed limits and speeding, so we basically overall looked at developing a few policies as part of the TMP, and the first one was a speed limit policy. And with respect to speed limits and speeding, it's first of all critical that roads are posted with speed limits appropriate for the road in question. Roads are designed to accommodate specific speeds. So many of the design features like lane widths, curvature, intersection treatments, and so on are chosen to accommodate those speeds. So when we set speed limits lower than the speed the road was designed for, we not only make a significant number of reasonable drivers illegal, but it can also lead to a lack of credibility for the posted speed limit, and which can in turn lead to increased tolerance by law enforcement. So there are some negatives with having posted speed limits lower than they should be. So through this study, we've provided recommendations for adopting the Transportation Association of Canada, which is the TAC, their guidelines for establishing posted speed limits. The guideline looks at various features of the roadway, like its classification, whether it's in an urban or a rural environment, and so on, and it provides a suggested posted speed limit. Through this study, we've also provided various recommendations for guidelines which determine the suitability of school and playground areas and zones, as well as community safety zones. And we also looked at some literature revolving around the recent usage of automated speed enforcement technology. Moving on to other policies, one of the more popular trends that we see across a lot of different municipalities is the usage of always stops as sort of a fix-all solution for speeding and various other safety concerns. Implementing always stops for traffic calming is strictly forbidden in the Highway Traffic Act, and generally speaking, implementing unwarranted always stops can actually lead to more negative impacts than they would solve. So as part of the TMP, we have developed a policy which basically reinforces the standards and warrant process for always stops to ensure they're appropriately used. And another common issue we see across different municipalities is non-standard pedestrian crossings. So things like unposted crossings with inadequate signage. And another concern is inadequate crossing protection types. So using school crossing signage when maybe a pedestrian crossover is warranted. So we've also developed a pedestrian crossing policy, which basically streamlines the process for identifying pedestrian crossover locations and ensuring that the proper facilities are provided to ensure safety for pedestrians. So while I mentioned posting speed limits lower than the design speed isn't recommended, the reality is that there are plenty of cases where a lower posted speed and resulting and resulting operating speed is desired. This could be a result of a change in road jurisdiction or classification, or change in the surrounding land uses, or there also may just be cases where drivers simply operate at higher speeds than intended. So in these cases, we look to traffic calming measures to effectively reduce the design speed of the roadway to reflect its desired operating speed. So traffic calming can include various temporary or permanent measures, which essentially through physical or educational means lessen the level of comfort with traveling at higher operating speeds. So as all county roads are arterial roads, therefore only a few traffic calming measures can be applied to address speeding problems. But some that are recommended are a speed display device and speed posted bollards that are shown on the screen here. As part of the TMP, we also developed transportation impact assessment guidelines for the county to basically assess potential impacts of traffic changes caused by proposed development on the county's road network. These guidelines aim to identify any infrastructure improvements or mitigation measures needed to ensure that the road network will operate acceptably and safely upon completion of the proposed development. And as part of the ongoing development and growth of the county should also develop a comprehensive data collection program focused on collecting turning movement count data that can be useful for developers when they conduct TIAs, and the costs can basically be offset by the county charging a nominal fee to the developers to give them the turning movement count data. So that concludes the overall presentation. We have prepared 3 poll questions that I will launch now. And once those questions are done, we can talk about next steps, and then we can open the floor for any discussion or questions that you might have. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll here. Okay. So on your screen, you will basically see a pop-up that says polls, and it shows it contains 3 questions. So once you answer the first question, which is, did you attend PIC1 for the county? Once you answer that, there will be a small arrow to the bottom right that you can click and basically toggle to question number 2 and 3. And once you've answered those questions, you can press submit, and we will basically get all the results here, and I can share them with you once everyone has had a chance to answer the questions. I will give about 5 minutes so everyone can go ahead and answer the questions. I see responses are coming in. Should we go? share. So I hope everyone can see basically the responses we've received so far.
Yep.
Sonia, I think we can move on to the next question. But basically we see that it's really 50-50. Most of so the 50% of the people that are here today were not part of PIC1, which is not a problem, but it's good to know. So, but thank you for coming this time.
Okay. So next question. Do you feel the proposed transportation master plan addresses your concerns and priorities? So a lot of people said mostly, but with some gaps.
So it would be interesting for us to know if you want. Those who answered no, why? And that would help us to maybe refine some of the analysis or conclusions that we made. So and by the way, if you don't feel like you're not comfortable sharing your feedback live during this session, feel free to write to us, or there's other ways you can contact us. We will provide you all the information for that. So, but we would be interested to know why you don't feel the proposed plan doesn't address your concerns and priorities.
Okay, and then the last question. What other suggestions or concerns do you have about transportation in your community? So we have older adults, rural transit, there's concern regarding road, there is some future signalization, support services, more transportation options, community support. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so
yeah, thank you for that. At this
thanks.
point, I think Anya, we're good for any questions that.
Yep. So maybe I can just talk about some next steps first, and then
Yes,
we can
very
open the
good.
floor.
Yes. Go.
So in terms of next steps, we will basically be taking all the feedback we receive here today and refining our recommendations and finalizing the draft transportation master plan report itself. After that, we will basically present the report to council, and then typically the report would be posted on the project webpage for a 30-day or more comment period before being finalized and adopted, at which point we would basically issue a notice of project completion. So as mentioned earlier, we are available to receive comments at any time during the study. So please feel free to reach out to either Francois or Taylor using the contact information presented on the slide here or through the project webpage. So with that said, maybe I can hand it off to Francois and Taylor if either of you have anything you would like to add, or if not, we can open up the floor here for discussion.
If I may, I just want to reiterate that emails can be sent to Francois or myself following the meeting for a few weeks at least. If you have further input that you want to provide at a later date. This video is going to be posted on YouTube and advertised on the county website so that anyone who was unable to attend can watch later and provide feedback via email that way as well.
So if anyone would like to ask questions, we'd be happy to answer you the best we can.
Alexis, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. I don't mind being the first one. So first of all, I want to thank the contractors as well as the county for putting this together. It's been super informative. I know my neighbors and I have definitely been listening in and have contacted the contractors previously. And you saw my face at the first meeting as well. I just wanted to follow up on Daniel Street as I am a resident of Daniel Street, and my neighbors can't be here this evening, so in hopes I'm representing them accordingly. Um, there is that new approach that's being taken with Daniel Street as a sort of like a future development, which I really appreciate. I can definitely see the need for roundabouts in future, if not right now, and the left turning lane could make things a lot safer. So I really, really appreciate that. One of my biggest concerns, however, is that there's no mention for the more residential urban part. So right now there's a significant focus on the commercial aspect of Daniel Street or that commercial area, which is great. I mean, it's our service area, which is extremely important. But as a resident of Daniel Street, when I moved here, I understood I lived on a busy street. I didn't understand that I lived on an unsafe street that the county would not ensure was made safe. And so that's my biggest concern when I'm looking at this contract and at this plan. So right now, we have said that road design affects speed limits. And most recently, the county has approved a $1.2 million rehabilitation of Daniel Street. And this is going to include the left turning. But this has been described in email as a mill and pave. And as we mentioned, road design directly affects people's abilities to speed. And that's the biggest issue that we're facing on Daniel Street. Now, in my opinion, a new mill and pave for Daniel Street, though it may be needed, is quite a concern as it does allow for people to speed more. When we inquired about potential cost-effective ways that we could make Daniel Street a little bit safer for its residents and the people that use Daniel Street quite regularly to get to those jobs where they provide services, we were told that there would not be cost-effective measures that could be implemented. And we were also instructed that in order to make it a safer street, whereas we could see a bike lane or potential delineators that we could have, that the street would actually have to be wider. So my neighbors and I decided to go out and actually measure our street. And there are areas on Daniel Street that is wide enough to meet the needs, according to Ottawa, to both have a road for vehicles and cycle lanes. So according to Ottawa, our road in many areas is big enough. So my biggest question right now is between Edie and Elgin is particularly wide. People are able to park. Snow is able to build up on both sides up to 6 feet. And now we are looking at $1.2 million being spent by our county to make to repave Daniel Street. Do you think within the contract and the scope of this project, recommendations could be made by the contractors to look at ways that could be cost effective to make Daniel Street more accessible for those using it, a little bit safer for its residents, and also provide accessibility to those trying to get to the rec center, kids getting on the school bus, or kids or people just trying to access groceries.
Yes, definitely. I think we did look at Daniel Street and mainly the more commercial part of Daniel Street. And we did recommend, as I mentioned, to make it from a 4-lane to a 2-lane, and then basically implement like multi-use paths and stuff, and then basically reduce the kind of the access density there. So that's a very good point, and we will definitely look into your concern as well and see what recommendations we can make for that.
Thank
Can
you.
I
I
add?
would really appreciate that.
I can add to that as well. Yeah. So, and then I think some of those recommendations were also for Madawaska Boulevard, not just Daniel
Yeah.
Street.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, yes, you caught that. But
Yeah.
yeah, so for Daniel Street, we did also look at, because we did find exactly the same thing. We measured it, and it was wide enough to have bike lanes in the section you mentioned, exactly just east of Edie Street. And basically, the big decision factor is those left turn lanes. So
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
yeah, so if the existing pavement is absolutely wide enough for bike lanes. However, like between intersections, but how at the intersections it's not unless you remove the left turn lanes. So that's basically the trade-off that we were looking at, actually more with the town of Arnprior, because there's the decision about which of those two routes is the more appropriate cycling route, whether this either Daniel Street or the adjacent ones, John Street or Thomas Street, or a combination of those. And actually, we don't have a recommendation between those, but yeah. So the other challenge is that the resurfacing that you're mentioning right now is basically, from our perspective, it predates the plan, the master plan. Like it's an ongoing project that's not it's not influenced by our plan because our plan isn't made yet, you know. But that said, yeah, we did identify that as, you know, a limitation in the current active transportation network for the town of Arnprior. And yeah, simply repaving and repainting it in its current form is not ideal. And we did also, as part of the looking at the crossings along county trails, we did identify the potential for a new pedestrian, or like an improved crossing at the Algonquin Trail, which could potentially have some traffic calming effect depending on how the geometry is, but it wasn't really within our control how that project would be designed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thankfully, with any project that gets approved, be it county, like at municipal or county level, things can be amended. And so that's sort of what we would like to see if there's an opportunity there. And that's on our side. But if a proper recommendation could be made, I mean, left turning lanes, I mean, there's different research that shows different things. It's unfortunate people would like to get to the rec center. I mean, a crossing there would be very helpful for those residents and even those coming down and Edward, I believe, like then they would be able to access it because right now there's no safe way for them to even cross to get to the rec center unless they walk all the way down or all the way up to the top. So I mean, there's definitely some options there. I think the reality is that people are going to run across the road. They do right now. I literally just saw someone today that I stopped at for that crossing who has a disability, a vision disability, and therefore use their cane to indicate that they were going to walk across the road. It's unfortunate that that is the reality. Our town is growing, and so these are all growth points that we have to work within. But absolutely, any type of recommendation I think that we could have that experts are being provided or providing rather to the county would be very, very helpful.
Noted.
Taylor
Thank you.
Taylor also has something to add.
Yeah, thank you. So Alexis, we've had a lot of back and forth on Daniel Street. So the design is still ongoing for it. We are implementing the median down at the commercial end. We are also planning to implement a PXO at the Algonquin Trail crossing in order to improve the crossing there as well. One of the things we did want to look at was adjusting the line painting. And if the recommendation was that preference that it would be safer to remove the left turning lanes, we would consider going forward with that because it can be fit within the existing geometry. However, we'd have to rely on the findings of this study before we proceed with that. But
yeah, I appreciate that feedback.
Sorry, if I may, we are also in discussions with the town of Arnprior to implement your speed ahead signs and things like that as well, that were identified in the presentation as options that can be used along arterial roads, such as this one.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. I think the reality is that living on Daniel Street is a different experience than driving it or accessing it in other ways. And so I cannot hold others accountable for my own lived experience. But the reality is right now that no one follows the 40 kilometers unless it is someone who's elderly or someone who lives on our street. And that we have people race on our street quite frequently in the evenings. So I can definitely say from our side, we're sort of experiencing it a little bit differently. But then when we look at accessibility, there again, we're seeing concerns that we see every day, people walking by. So I do appreciate the feedback. I do appreciate the contractors being open to that and some ideas coming forward. I'll definitely, Taylor, follow up with you concerning the PXO if we think that that's something that's going to be done with the mill and pave and what some options are there. So thank you. I appreciate it a lot.
Any more questions? Oh, there's a comment here.
Anyone else have anything to add?
And if you don't right now, it's fine. I mean, like it was mentioned before, you have the opportunity if something comes up and you do have questions that you want to send us by email. You have time. The presentation, the session today will be, you can view it again if you wish. It was recorded, so again, don't hesitate if you have if questions come up and you feel like asking us. We'll be happy to answer any questions. But we'll stay around. If ever you want to ask us a question, doesn't have to be now. We'll still be around for the next little while. So there's a questions. Are there considerations for Daniel Street bike lanes that are seen in areas of Ottawa like Westboro and Interberg, Mechanicsville, where they're considered shared lanes, which could help alleviate the concern about insufficient width for turning lanes and bike lanes. Maybe Narayan, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, so I think the question here is related to whether the bike lanes need to be like reserved lanes or whether they can just be shared lanes, so shared where bikes are in the same lane as cars. So yeah, so there's basically the Ontario Ministry of Transportation sets out guidelines about the level of traffic, the amount of traffic that is appropriate for having shared lanes. And generally that would sort of, the upper limit is 5,000 cars a day, but really should be ideally less than 1,000 cars a day. And the volumes on Daniel Street are quite a bit beyond that. I think there were, what is it, around 8,000 if I remember correctly. In any case, it's outside of the range which is considered more acceptable more recently. So the standards have gotten a bit stricter more recently. The intent being that so more of the population would potentially be comfortable using the bike route. So yeah, you could have bike lanes. Some of the older bike lanes, for example, like I'm not sure which particular lanes you're referring to, but there are older examples of bike lanes which just end at the intersection and put people into the same traffic lanes as cars. That's not really as recommended more recently as it would have been in the past, because that just basically makes people, a large portion of the population feel like they wouldn't be comfortable using that in the first place with just such a heavy traffic volume. So if we did look at putting bike lanes, we would want it to be continuous and not just end at the intersections. And yeah, so if there weren't bike lanes, then there are other options like just adjusting the pavement markings to change the lane widths to make sure they're not excessively wide, for example. But yeah, thanks for the comment. It's a good point. It's a good thought. Yeah, and the response here from Jacob. Understandable. Thank you for the acknowledgement. Appreciate that painting is seen as an appropriate and attainable solution to reduce width, which is shown to calm traffic. Yeah, absolutely. So painting the lanes simply such that they're narrower can help calm traffic. The other part that about the narrower lanes that can help is that if the oh, sorry, my camera's off. If the basically a shoulder is painted between the intersections, that means that you have a little bit of lateral shift. So instead of having a dead straight lane all the way down the street, you have at the intersection the lane shifts out to make room for the left turn lane, and then between the intersections, the lane can shift inwards, which just creates a little bit of curvature, which helps slow down drivers.
So someone just joined. So we already made the presentation, but it was recorded, so you can watch it after the session. But if you have any questions that you would like to ask, we're there for that. Or you can send us your questions later by email. So if it's okay, we're gonna stop the recording. Anyway, again, if there's questions, they will be noted and they will be shared online. Yeah, and we'll stay around. We'll close our camera now, but we're there. So if ever there's